Da, 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 da. Welcome back to the stage, Deepak. Well, everyone, we know everyone's networking. It's been an awesome morning, so we want to go ahead and kick it off and have a fantastic conversation with a dynamic panel. As I let them know, I'm kind of throwing away the questions because I really want to hear some of the thoughts based off some of our early conversations. But just to kick it off, well, we're all very familiar, Deepak, with you and the work you're doing at Small Energy Water. So I'd love to start with Francois right here. If you could just give our audience just a quick intro, who you're with, what you do, and then from there, David, and then Michael.
Certainly. Francois Rodigari. I'm with San Jose Water Company, and I'm privileged to really start their sustainability and innovation program and leveraging both. So,
thank you. And David?
All right, well, hello everybody, and it's certainly a delight for me to be here and to be on the stage with such distinguished people. My name is David Nahai. I run a number of companies under the umbrella of David Nahai Companies. That consists of a law firm, a consulting company, an investment company, and we do sustainability and real estate. Before coming back to the private sector, I headed the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, so I'm very interested in this discussion about ESG and utilities that we're about to embark upon. I have a public sector role. I serve on the Regional Water Board, and I'm also privileged to chair the Los Angeles Business Council as well. So, thank you.
Hello, everybody. Michael O'Donnell. I'm the National Vice President for SAP, our utilities vertical. I've been with the company for 22 years. Most of that time has been spent in our utilities vertical. I had done some other things in our public sector and regulated industry as well earlier in my career, but have been running the practice for the last 5 years. Also a board advisor for organization called Data Advisor, which does fraud and security, as well as another company called Alert Enterprise, which does more physical cyber security convergence. Looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you. I enjoyed the last conversation. We were talking about eat the elephant and ESG. It can mean so many things, but Deepak, I wanted you to kick this off and have the other panel chime in. And when you think of the speed of technology meshing with this eat the elephant concept across not just utilities but corporates, like where's the role of technology and how does that help us kind of take that first bite and then love to have the other panelists chime in and see how we can take this conversation forward.
Thank you, Jason. And I think I just feel we started with that theme rather than talking about ESG by ourselves. We need to extend through the technology to the billions of people. Because if we maintain the ESG goals to the corporate level, to the government level, or the city level, we cannot achieve. And I think we all know that if technology is the only tool can extend the power of, with respect to what we talk about environment, we talk about social impact, we talk about governance is all about the people governance too. So I feel that technology is everywhere, is everybody has. We all carry our cell phones. I think those are, world have around 5.2 billion cell phones, smart cell phones that the people have. I think if we educate and empower people with the goal of ESG, that for me, that's extension from a technology. And make it simple. Don't make it these, doesn't matter we talk about sustainability, we talk about reliability, we talk about ESG. Don't make it complex, make it simple for the normal person life, how they can contribute by engaging in real time, by understanding that simply to be the part of the school. So that's, as a company, our mindset, and I feel whenever we talk to broader audience, they all get aligned to that.
Thank you. And for the other panelists, I think Deepak, you said something that we always talk about making it simple, but those who are doing it, the complexity that actually takes to make something simple, just to make a button or whatever, or to make the power flow. Right? There's so much that goes into that. So I'd love to get Francois and David's perspective as, where do we start to try to use that the simplicity complex to really advance ESG?
Sure. I mean, I think the concept is simple, right? We all understand what we need to do, but the devil is in the details. How do you do what you need to do? Most companies don't really have anything in place to really measure accurately what it is that they do and the impact of what they do. So you need to put that in place. You also need to have visionary management to set goals, and then to use those measurement systems to measure your progress and to mobilize your staff and to change your culture. So that is incredibly complex, right? And then you have to make sure that ultimately what you do makes a difference on your ability to operate in the future, right? So I like to kind of, the simplicity of the concept for ESG is that you should be able to make sure that what you do today to serve your customers does not impair your ability to do the same in the future. So that is a true definition of being sustainable. If you can do what you do and provide great service and great quality, and you can do it forever, then you are a sustainable company. But to do that is extraordinarily complex, and we can talk about some of those details, but I'll let somebody else chime in.
All right, thank you. Well, look, first of all, let me express appreciation for Deepak and his company for all that they do to help utilities actually accomplish this thing we call ESG. Deepak and I have worked together. I know of his capabilities, so I want to compliment you in public, Deepak. But I'm going to depart from what my colleagues have just said. I do not believe that ESG is simple at all. To begin with, we have a definitional problem. Environmental, social, governance. What does that mean? It actually means different things to different people, to different companies. Right now, apart from Fitch coming in and saying that this is part of how they rate companies, and apart from the Sustainability Standard Board coming up with certain criteria for how we're going to define the ESG, it's really a very amorphous concept. In some places, on the environmental, yes, there we can look at something concrete because there are metrics. What have we done in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, in terms of decarbonization, air pollution, water conservation, and so on. When it comes to social, which really has to do with how a company or an entity deals outwardly, right? How do you ensure that in terms of the work that you do, that you're actually doing something for social equity, for racial equity, for diversity on the outside? Governance is internal. And many companies, in terms of what they're doing internally to ensure that there is racial equity, diversity, and so on, we come across a lot of opacity. It's not very clear. Now, the realm that I'm used to, which is the publicly owned utilities, there, I think there's quite a lot more transparency. But then, even there, one has to think, where does this concept of ESG actually come from? Is it regulatory? Is it what consumers demand? Is it what investors demand, right? Is it what employees demand? And how does one navigate all of those different processes? And at the end of the day, we come across a harsh reality, which has to do with money, right? For the private sector, we have to make sure that progress equals profits. In other words, the regulatory mechanisms have got to be put in place so that private sector companies actually believe that they're going to make more money by adhering to these concepts of ESG, that they'll have better employees, that their consumers will buy their products more readily, that the regulators will be happy, and that the investors who ultimately are looking for the return on their money, that they will be happy too. When it comes to the publicly owned utilities, it's a different calculation because you're not dealing with profits, you're dealing with ratepayers, right? And there too, one has to make sure at the end of the day that the ratepayers are going to be happy with what you're doing. And I'll finish with this. I just had lunch yesterday with the leadership of my old agency, LADWP, and they're looking at LA100. They're looking at Operation Next. These are, if there was ever an ESG program, it's decarbonization and recycling wastewater, right? But there's a cost to that. And therefore the messaging to the public in order to make those investments palatable is an entire other part of the ESG challenge. So,
yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. I'm going to take it from the perspective for Deepak and I from an SAP and SEW perspective, and how we take all of this stuff that we just heard, and how do we actually make it actionable, right? How do we actually do something about all these different things in reality, right? How do we make it real? And so what we really tried to focus on from an SAP perspective is, how do you actually measure, and how do you take that and actually be able to report on all of these different things that you need to measure in order to actually achieve some of these things that we talk about, whether it be driving down carbon emissions or having social justice infused into how you operate. And so a lot of the work that we've been doing with the systems that we have at SAP, the Sustainability Control Tower, the solutions that we have with our partnership with SEW, really lend themselves to actually making this thing actionable, right? And that's really what it's all about. I think back to 10 years ago, and ESG there was a big focus, and a lot of people had to produce a lot of reports, right? And the reality back then was they were just there to produce reports. So they would gather a bunch of information after the fact. They would produce out their ESG report, and then they would move on with their day. And we were having a lot of conversations about how do we actually drive these things, but nobody was really truly interested at that point in time. I think the interesting thing now in the evolution that we've seen over the last, I'll say 5 or so years, is that it's become real. People do want to drive down carbon emissions. They do want to become more equitable in how they serve their communities. And then it's now the question of how we actually make that real. And the first thing that needs to happen is you actually need to have systems in place that allow you to do the measuring and do the analyzing, and then be able to report in a more meaningful way that's actually, I'll say, closer to real time than, way after the fact.
Thank you. And Francois, so looking at it from the San Jose water perspective, are you seeing roadblocks increase or decrease as you try to implement some pretty aggressive initiatives there at your organization?
I think it's a complex question, and by the way, David, I support what you said, and but I think what I meant was the devil is in the detail. So for some of our initiatives, there are some good news. For instance, we just completed a fleet electrification plan, where we have a very good analysis of what it will take to move to 100% electric fleet. It actually will save money and reduce greenhouse gases, even with the cost of installation of charging station and the premium you pay currently on electric vehicles. The challenge is, Angel mentioned the Ford Lightning. Well, you can't buy one. So Ford made a good product, and they are struggling, like every auto manufacturers, to decide what is the demand. Auto manufacturers spent the last 20 years telling the regulators and the public that nobody wanted an electric vehicle. And then Elon came along and changed the paradigm. But within Ford, if you listen to the discussion, there's a camp that still believe that EVs have no place, and the camp that is in charge of EVs doesn't have the resources and investment to meet demand. And it is true at almost every electric manufacturer. And then even if they scaled up, the problems with the batteries, can they buy enough battery? Can they scale up fast enough? So I think we are in a time where for the foreseeable future, demand will exceed supply, and so we will not be able to achieve our goals as quickly as we could and realize the full benefit. So that's the challenge from a utility perspective. The other one is energy storage and generation. right? Water utilities in California use, unbelievably, about 20% of the power used in California. So it is huge. Water is a huge energy user. We have a California Energy Commission that says that they want to encourage wind, solar, and have big plans. But the utilities are regulated by the California Public Utilities Commission, which regulates the electrical companies and the water utilities. And, you know, our view on those things between energy companies, electrical utilities, and electrical users are not necessarily the same. So can the California Public Utilities Commission figure out how to incentivize us to generate and store all the power we can possibly generate? We have large facilities, large parking lots. On paper, we could almost generate all the power we need, provided that we are incentivized and supported, and that we can actually get enough storage at a reasonable cost. So those are real challenges. The technical solutions are there, but they are not readily available, and they are still expensive. The IRA does help a great deal towards that, but that's our challenge. How do we figure out, and we're working very hard on that. For instance, we are replacing our plan is to replace our backup generators, which are diesel generators. They require a hazardous material permit. They require an air permit. They require maintenance and fuel, and they are dirty. They need to be exercised. They're tremendously expensive to operate. The simple thing would be to get battery storage and tie it to your solar, and really decrease your energy usage through renewable. But that is tremendously difficult. If I call Tesla today and say I want 2 megapacks, they don't even answer my calls because I'm too small of a potato. But so those are the challenges, and so we're working very hard at making it happen. And the last thing I want to say before I move on is, you know, we talked about systems and accounting, and that's really what it is. And to me, ESG is the accounting and the measurements is a huge challenge. I mean, every investor-owned utility, like I am from, has excellent accounting systems, right? And we can produce quarterly financial statement, annual financial statements, and we're heavily regulated, and everybody agrees how that is done. If we were held to the same standard for our ESG numbers that we are held for accounting, we'd all be in jail, because essentially we are building from estimate to estimates. And so, you know, what are my scope 3? Scope 3 is my supply chain, right? So I buy a stick of pipe, maybe in India. What is the carbon dioxide associated with that? Or, I don't know. I might get an estimate that I can use, but that's all I can do. So I look at all the activities we do. We can measure how much gas we use in diesel. We can measure how much electricity. But that scope 3 world, which I think regulation are needed, and the SEC is working on that. That will be, I think, in my opinion, and I don't want to say this lightly, I think it's one of those places where regulation play a positive role. They put everybody on the same playing field. Now there are rules, and it will be able to get us to a place where I can, if a customer asks me, what is the carbon footprint associated with a gallon of water that you sell me, I can give them a number rather than an estimate. And so that's what we're working towards.
Thank you. I actually want to pick up on this theme of regulation that Francois was just talking about. But our conversation reminds me of I was in a meeting once with Shimon Peres, the old president of Israel. And he said something that has stuck with me. He said, you know, pessimists are always right to begin with, but optimists are always right at the end. Now, I have no idea what that means, but I kind of like it, you know. So I have decided, therefore, to be optimistic in the way I live my life and in the way that I do things, and so it is, I think, with ESG, right? We have to be hopeful, optimistic, and resolute, and believe which is what they keep telling athletes, believe. I once coached an AYSO team for little kids. I could tell them to believe all I wanted. The kids didn't know how to play soccer. That was the end of it, But with respect to ESG, I do think that we do have a chance if we can support really basically the public to go along here. So regarding regulation, regulation in my view is a very good thing, providing it's good regulation, right? You can have good regulation, you can have bad regulation. So the revolution that we're seeing in the energy space towards renewables, this is a regulatory driver, right? And it's that regulatory driver that's driven down the price of solar and wind and actually let us contemplate a cleaner, safer future. But what we have to do in terms of everything that we're doing, whether it's water conservation, wastewater recycling, stormwater capture, the solar, wind, geothermal, it's kind of this transformation that we're witnessing, it all costs. And this is where we have to bring along the ratepayers. We have to bring along the folks that, now the Inflation Reduction Act is a huge gift, a huge gift. I'm just so thankful that this happened before the results that we're going to be seeing today, because if things go the way, if the House flips, it may be that the Inflation Reduction Act would never have happened. And that money is really needed if we're going to have the United States continue to be a leader in the world in terms of energy transformation, in terms of leading the world towards dealing with the climate change challenge that we have to grapple with. So I think there's an enormous amount of money that's coming. It won't be enough here in Los Angeles. It won't be for LA 100 and Operation Next and all of these other initiatives, but it helps. What now we have to do is to have a conversation with the people of LA, the people of California, about the additional investments that have to be made. And we've got to make sure that we do that in the way that a just and fair society would. In other words, I'm looking at a group of people who are here sitting in Beverly Hills in a beautiful hotel. You all look absolutely wonderful, dressed up, beautiful, what a lovely affluent crowd, right? You and I and the people up on this stage can afford, right, to bear the brunt of rate increases and cost increases for our sisters and brothers and fathers and mothers who cannot. And that's how things have to be ordered. And now there are hurdles. There's Prop 218, and there are other hurdles to doing that. But I think we have to overcome them if we're all, as a society, going to truly accomplish ESG goals.
Thank you, David. I think there's some really strong things laid out there, but Deepak, I know the optimist you are, and you love to tackle big challenges. How, when you see that, as an innovator, what comes to your mind, and how is some of the partnerships that we're trying to create here really help solve some of those challenges just mentioned?
I think I just want to underscore all three of them. Regulation, we can build as much regulation we can build. If the people are not part of that regulation, we cannot achieve that. We can put on paper. And I think I just want to think about Michael and me always talk about this, is how we can extend that information and the power in the hand of the people. Because we're shifting, we always talk about power generation or water, creating more water because people need more efficient. At the same time, we are talking about this is the only industry we have to provide that as an affordable price. We can't just do certain things because we can do it because we have money, because if we take that route, and I'm going to underscore what David and me always have this conversation, irrespective of, we talk about power industry, water industry, all the gas industry, solar industry, ratepayers. 10 years back, 5 years back, we can talk about ratepayers. Ratepayers really no more ratepayers than consumers. And those consumers, no more consumers, everybody, the people. When David made the statement, maybe some people can pay a higher price, but we still have 42% of the people who are really cannot make payments, and they struggle to make the most important commodity payment every year or every month. So how we can bring it in, and we feel when the problem is complex, and you need to simplify that, because the people who are getting impacted is billions of people, who are the consumer of the most important commodity. So we feel as a team, as a company, from a technology standpoint, work with this industry, work with the regulators to simplify that, to make sure whatever the dollar spent by them for any of these activities, for ESG goals, is truly measurable and have the participation from they're serving millions of people, or they're serving billions of people. They can measure that and see the right impact and give it to the benefit to not equal to everybody, but the person who's truly participating get more benefit, and the person who cannot participate because they are underserved, they will get a little bit more. So that we feel that technology is the only solution, because 10 years back we cannot talk about, we cannot think the information can flow within a second to that everybody in the world, on their mobile phone. Right now, at this point, because we have the internet brought zero barrier, internet brought, and the mobility or the applications brought the intelligence in that. Fingerprint definitely have a lot of fake news too, for good reasons. But we are the utilities are the most trusted partner. If they have the right, if their billions of customers have the right information at the right time, and they can take the right decision. All these look big goals on ESG, look big regulation wise is very strong, but I think everybody can participate, and any money which is federal government or state government is giving to invoke or participate and do something, I think ultimately continue, because it's no more, we don't need to look back again to the government to keep feeding us to something, but it is, we feel it is our responsibility as a citizen, sitting in the United States or sitting in any part of the world, what we can do. And I think all of us sitting in the room think that we all want to participate, we all want to save water, we all want to save power, we all want to be green, we all want to be decarbonized, we all want to do good things, but how I do it? I'm handicapped if I cannot participate in that activity. And I think that technology and platform is the only thing. I know that we look kind of a bias because we're on this panel. Me and Michael is a part of the technology platform company, but I feel it is our responsibility every day, every second. It is our responsibility to extend and keep innovating and give to this industry the best solution, so that they can value and they can pass that value, they can pass that saving, they can innovate to the customer and the people who they're serving. Sorry guys, I get a little bit excited about this, but I think it's very important for us to keep going down.
So I'll just add on to what Deepak was saying. A lot of good things being said here. I think a lot about what was actually said in some of the earlier panels around pilots and programs and kind of all these different initiatives and innovation. I think what really needs to happen is how we actually sustain these things on a very long-term basis. How do they become integrated into how you actually operate for the long term? So when we start to look at trying to achieve these goals, it really does come down to how you operate and run your business, how the consumers actually engage with their utility in a more proactive way that's going to produce the net results that we all want to try to achieve. And so the more I think about this, the more I think about just having the entire thing be fully integrated. It's what made us successful from an SAP, SEW perspective. It's what has made a lot of businesses successful. I think when we think about ESG, it really does need to be fully integrated in every aspect into how you operate day in and day out. And we really won't achieve the things we want to achieve until we actually do that. We just look at kind of the ESG reports that we have out there today, how they're produced, to your point, where you're getting the data from, what the data looks like. it's not anywhere near where we want it to be to actually state that here's what, what did you say, a gallon of water actually produces as far as the carbon footprint is. It's just, we're not there yet. And that needs to be the focus and the goal. So when we think about, the Inflation Investment Act and how those dollars are being leveraged, it really should be in more, as far as my perspective is concerned, less in pilots and more in those foundational technologies that are really going to be the needle movers for the long term.
Thank you. We have about 7 minutes left, but I did want to make sure we get in 1 or 2 questions for the audience after we get a few more comments from the panel. So would love to get an audience or 2 questions.
No, I wanted to add to what Michael said. I think that's exactly right. A meaningful ESG program for a company requires a fundamental integration of ESG into its operation, into its way of thinking, into its planning, budgeting, and acquisition. And I think really what needs to be understood that process is very disruptive. It is not an easy process. And so while it sounds good, and I'm really a good case study where I essentially sold our executives the idea of having an ESG program, and everybody thought it was going to be a feel-good, great thing, go and do it, and until we started to ask folks to actually make some changes into their priorities in terms of keeping some accountings that they were not keeping, and so it went from, this is a great idea, to, well, we didn't realize this is what it was going to be, and get out of here. So, but then eventually it was, digested, and now we are building those systems and making sure that it becomes an integrated part of what we do. And what I did find is having clear policies, setting goals, not necessarily knowing how you're going to get there, but having those goals and then documenting that and sharing the success with all the folks that makes those goals happen is greatly motivational, and that is how you change your company. But it is not an easy process.
Okay, I just wanted to take a minute just to talk to any of the private sector entities that are here today that want to do business with utilities. Because the ESG priority at utilities provides an enormous opportunity for companies wanting to do business with them, because these are mandates, whether regulatory or self-imposed, that the utilities have to accomplish. And they don't have the ability to do it on their own. I mean, when I was at DWP, we actually managed to build our own wind farm. But that is not possible today. That would have to be contracted out. Solar, the whole idea of power purchase agreements. But I think that a great deal of research needs to be done by companies as to exactly how to approach a utility in order to do business with them. And there is just such a lack of understanding about that. I have companies who come to me and they say, you know what, this particular technology here, if the utility will do this, they'll be able to cut down their workforce by 20%. And I say, do you really think that you can go to a publicly owned utility and tell them that they can fire 20% of their workforce? Is that like, so I mean, one has to understand how it is that the utility, which, I mean, utilities are really, even the investor-owned utilities, are so regulated that they might as well be government entities. One has to understand how they think, what their priorities are. The person you're talking to on the other side of the table isn't motivated by money, right? She or he is motivated by respect, by not wanting to go out on a limb, by the understanding that they're dealing with ratepayer money and they have to be very conservative with it, that they can't take a risk just because the person they're dealing with is articulate and well-spoken. This is why nascent companies, right, have such a difficult time actually penetrating this process. So anyway, I think we talked about all of those things, but we didn't talk about the companies here who actually want to do business with utilities. So I thought I'd just mention that.
Thank you. We have time for a question. We have a question.
Yeah. My question is on data transparency, right? Everyone has ESG goals. You have the climate pledges, the 1.5 degree club, Paris Accord. Everybody has a different understanding. But what I'm not seeing across countries, sectors, private sectors, public sectors, is data transparency, because you have redundant efforts and monies being spent to do studies and take initiatives. And because there's no, let's say, central body that regulates all of that, we find redundancies don't exist. So people are doing the same thing that they could have avoided if there was more data transparency. Can you guys talk a little bit about that and the sharing of data amongst your groups?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I think that's the data transparency, traceability, and the ability to verify it is very important. So there are nonprofit organizations at GRI, Global Reporting Initiatives, that publish standards. And we at San Jose Water we are working towards providing a report on ESG that adheres to GRI standards. So those are the things that folks can encourage companies like ours to become more transparent by adopting voluntarily some standards until there is some regulations. But it's out there. There is some really good information, and it's voluntary. So again, I think this is something that as a customer, you can always ask your service provider to questions related to what standards have they adopted? Do they just have an ad hoc effort, or do they have a formal program, and are they aiming for that transparency that we all need so it's actually meaningful?
I will just add in, when you think about the actual data itself and the measurement of that data, there's such a wide variance of what utilities actually have capabilities around, depending upon where they're at, who they are. And so we're still in the very early days of actually being able to have standards around how all the data is gathered. I see Mike here from Itron, and I think about, how are you pulling data off of operational systems and bringing that back into your business systems to be able to contextualize that and then be able to actually measure it. I think that's part of the challenge. We're just really early on in the process. So I think you'll see more and more standards developed over time as it becomes more prevalent across more organizations.
Thank you. You have a question? Last question?
Hi, I'm Angel. You knew I was going to ask a question. Here it is. In our benchmarking studies through NPUC and even working within utilities for the management consulting lens, I have found that very few people understand or have been educated or trained on or had any sort of introduction really to the terms ESG or a lot of these different programs. So my question to you is, are you finding the same? And in your organizations, have you launched programs to teach the people that within your companies what this means, just by definition, and then maybe what it means to you, your organization as a whole?
From an SAP perspective, we've been at the forefront in this regard. I think we were ranked #1, and Deepak's heard me say this before, 14 years in a row by the Wall Street Journal Sustainability Index, and everything that ESG kind of is comprised of is something that SAP has really taken a proactive stance in trying to develop out systems based off of what we actually do for different organizations to really be able to start to measure these things. So it's a constant topic of discussion inside of our organization, at least, and something that we're always trying to work on, how we actually help the organizations that we serve around the globe be able to do it better.
Thank you. Last word, anyone?
Well,
I just want to answer to her, to your point, it's very important that you ask, do you, like we all understand, and once you understand, then only you can solve the problem. So I think from SAW standpoint, we also launched our ESG platform, because it is very important for, as a technology company, if we are talking to our industry partners, like in this case is water, power, gas, or solar company, can we solve that problem for them because we understand the problem very deep? And how we do that, the same context we're talking about. For them as a corporate to meet those ESG goals, what kind of the data they currently have, and that's what I love about, I'm keep pointing, to Michael about that, because as an SAP sitting all across from financial data to the energy data and all, you can pull that and connect the dots to all the way to the operational people, corporate people, from a reporting standpoint, so that you have, and then at the same time, the people who are getting impact, because if customer have a choice to buy a green power or use certain time green power versus fossil fuel, end of the day, utilities are supplying that, If I know that if I'm wasting water too much is actually impacting, for all the good reason, that when the water gets supplied, the power being used, and is that water during this time and you're wasting and you actually somehow disconnecting actually to promote more and more waste and fossil fuel, because this water coming to your home by the power only. So we connect all that dot as a ESG platform, and we keep working on it. I don't think so. To all the points is, the problem is complex, but we all learned from our parents and teachers is, when the problem is complex, just divide the problem into the small, simple, problems, and then start solving one by one. But just don't look the problem says, I don't know what to do with that, and just fake it rather than make it. For us is our mantra, for our solution is, whatever we try to solve is, get on it, go behind it. If complex, I know that we were talking about eating elephant, but I think because I'm vegetarian, though I try to, I rather than trying to eat tree, I will take the fruits out of that, and leaf out of that. So I think we are able to, good reasons as a team, working with the industry, working with the regulators, working with the technology partner like SAP and all, providing that solution, give it that. Maybe that is 70% for some people, some people it's 60%, for some people it's 90%. But it's innovate, keep breaking that, and keep working towards it.
Well, Deepak, thank you. Thanks all to our great panel. We give a round of applause here. Thank you very much. Thank you, Michael, David, Francois, Deepak. Thank you.